Christianity is not something we do because it's good to do. Christianity is something we do because we can't help but live really in reality.
I feel like typically villains don't always have a motivation that I like connect with, and that one was like, dang, what a fascinating motivation that I need to reflect on in myself.
Welcome to Media Mystics, a podcast encouraging encounters with Christ through film, music, poetry, video games, and all mediums of inspiring art. Your hosts are Charlie and Thomas, two men on a quest to grow closer to God and illuminate our culture. Today we explore the film, The Matrix. While we discuss these works of art from a Catholic perspective, the views on this podcast are our own and not official perspectives of the Catholic Church. We do not endorse every message of these works. Personal discernment is advised. Join us as we seek to become Media Mystics.
Spoiler alert, you're living in a fantasy world. Welcome to our episode on The Matrix, where there is more than just that to be spoiled. I'm Thomas, and this is Charlie.
Hello. So yeah, if you haven't seen the film, check it out. We're going to jump into it now.
Okay.
All right. Just to give general praise to this film, I think it's a wonderful film. I like it. I think it's got a lot of good. I think that certainly just setting aside, I think some of the vulgarity, using God's name in vain and stuff. The general piece of the simulation I find fascinating. I think this is like the best presentation that I think that most people refer to when they're talking about like, is the world a simulation? Are we living in a simulation?
Yeah, who needs essentially to read Plato's Cave when you've got the I'm not sure what the name of the producer was, the brothers,
I'm actually not sure.
Yeah,
I don't know.
but yeah, who needs Plato when you've got this?
It's funny you actually bring up Plato's Cave because there was a specific reference to, and I even jotted this quote down when I think it's Morpheus later in the film brings up that like the people are so dependent on this system that some are even going to like fight to keep this system in place. Like they're not going to want to remove it. And certainly like as we get into Cypher's character, like Cypher's a huge character.
For sure.
Like, man,
yeah,
Plato's Cave. If you haven't read Plato's Cave, please go look up Plato's Allegory.
Yeah, this is almost assuredly, Plato's Cave is almost assuredly the impetus behind such a movie. Because it's the same theme. Like the big question, what is reality?
For somebody that doesn't know the allegory of the cave, since that's already been brought up, do you want to just give do you feel like you could give an explanation in like brief summary?
I'll give like a 30-second summary. Basically, Plato's allegory of the cave is you are living in a cave in chains, and what you see and what you think to be real are actually just shadows on the wall of this cave. You don't know what's making the shadows, and you certainly don't know what's outside the cave. But you've been kept in the dark your whole life, and so you think the dark is all there is.
And the shadows are like reality. You don't understand.
And the shadows are reality.
That cast those shadows, yeah.
So, and that's basically the cave, and that's like sparked a lot of philosophical discussion over the years about like, what is real? Like, are we experiencing what is real? How much should we trust our experiences? And that's what this film was like, really an exploration of, but also it adds like kung fu and fighting and like some hero stuff. And so it's a really cool film. But
I think that the piece of the allegory that I really enjoy too is he talks about if there's multiple people in this cave and one person is set free and he turns around and like sees the light that's casting these shadows and he understands like what objects are and oh my gosh, the shadows are not the real things, they're just like images of the real things. And then if he goes outside, like his eyes are going to take time to like adjust and it's going to be like painful for him to see the light, but eventually he's going to see like objects and then eventually he's going to be able to like even see the sun itself, like the origin of light. And if he goes back to his friends in the cave, like they're not gonna believe it. They're not gonna understand it, and even some of them are gonna want to, as Plato says, like they're gonna want to kill him, like the man who's like coming to bring truth. And I think that's kind of his way of presenting that. Like sometimes the truth is feels threatening to people.
Yeah, for sure.
That's I think a huge theme unpacked in The Matrix, and I think that even Cypher is interesting because he like kind of knows the truth but still hates it. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, and this is also a hugely Christian theme. Like Jesus, the man from heaven, comes to give us the truth, mm-hmm. which is himself. And like here we are. Yeah. Either accepting it or freaking out about it or ignoring it.
Opening prologue of John is just on like the light came into the world, but like people preferred the darkness.
People preferred the darkness. Yeah, for sure.
Maybe we'll come back to the cave and that piece later, but I think just on the question of like, is life a simulation, since that's kind of the dominant theme here, my view of responding to that is like I feel like that question for me, like, am I living in the Truman Show? Am I like in some kind of Matrix thing? Was sort of frightening to me when I was like in high school. I think there was an episode in Lost that also picked up on this notion of one of the characters, like I think it's Hurley, is like thinks he's in a simulation or like he doesn't think he's in reality, and that's like frightening. Which I think is just interesting. Right at the front of it is like we don't want. I feel like to believe that we're in a simulation. Like there's some aspect of feeling like my reality is fake automatically feels like a bad thing, which I think is interesting. And then secondly, like how do we proceed forward with that question? For me, I think of René Descartes, the philosopher who's well known for saying that like I think therefore I am. Now I'm not like an expert on his philosophy, but I've always found a lot of actually sort of faith that has moved me towards God out of what he was talking about. That he seems to have taken this question like, is this real? Like that the Matrix has presented. And he seems to say, I could be in the Matrix. I could be in a dream. Like there could be this great deceiver, I think is the language that he talks about, is like maybe there's some spiritual God out there manipulating my senses and making me think this is real when it's not. And he seems to come at the conclusion of, well, I seem to be thinking, so therefore I exist, which is where we get the famous I think, therefore I am. But he doesn't seem to ever be able to prove that anything in his sense perception is real. Like at the very least, René Descartes exists, or I exist. Like me, I know I do, but I don't actually.
And he gets a little bit farther than that, but it's his central question is about whether or not like he can trust what's presented to him.
Yeah, and I at least knew he was able to say I exist, even if just like in my mind or something. But like, how can I prove that the things I can touch and sense are real? I wasn't aware of how he gets to.
Yeah, he has like a couple of principles on it. I don't think they're particularly important
convincing
for today. But it's like basically he says, if I recall, all those philosophical bros on the internet, feel free to just like
hit the comment section.
Totally slash us here.
Descartes' philosophy.
But like he seems to say like if I have like a consistent and coherent and clear, distinct. I think clear and distinct is the language that he used. Perception of something, then it's more likely that it's real, which is like kind of interesting. But I think, I don't think that particularly is why he's famous. I don't think he gets, like, he's still considered part of the rationalist tradition and like inaugurating the rationalist tradition that says like, hey, the really real stuff is what I can think about and not out there. Whereas like the empiricists are like, the really real stuff is the stuff that's out there, and like, I can to collect data on that, but I can't always trust my mind in the same way.
Interesting.
So
both of those are fascinating, which I would like to explore more of. But at least for me, and
really
how I've encountered some of that was I always found it fascinating that it doesn't seem like it's provable in like a very empirical, scientific, like there is no shadow of a doubt. Like I don't feel like I can get to that level of certainty that this is actually real. Like I think that I just have to operate on faith in some certain sense of like, maybe you're not real. And maybe like this recording studio is a figment of my imagination. I guess that's like technically not like a potential. I could be in the Matrix and I can't prove it. I find it fascinating that our world like can't prove that. Like the fact that the fabric of the universe is such that for me to just keep moving forward into reality, I kind of just have to, at the ground level, make the assumption of faith that this is actually real. Otherwise I'm going to like, and stuck in a cycle.
And that's definitely like part of the nature of like faith, but it's also just part of the nature of being human. Like I have to live in a world where I don't have everything deconstructed. I just like, I just like have to move forward with like the data that I have on hand and like believe that it's reliable.
Yeah.
And like you can kind of cast a lot of doubt on that. But like that's often what you're dealing with. Except when somebody comes and says, but this isn't the really real world, And so that's what's so interesting about this film. And that's what's so interesting about like the message of Jesus is like, hey, like what if the world is more than just what your sense and your immediate reason can seem to comprehend?
Yeah.
So, So Charlie, tell me more about like who's your favorite character?
I mean, I would probably say that Neo in the I think his arc is fascinating, and certainly the conclusion of the film of which is very much a Paschal Mystery sort of vibe, I think.
Oh yeah, you better believe it. Yeah.
I think is like the most in your face sort of Christian perspective here of, okay, man dies and comes back to life, and afterwards he's doing wacky things with reality. He's able to like stop bullets and like go through people. All that flies as Paschal Mystery to me. Like, what do we believe as Christians? We believe that like actually Jesus died, and in resurrecting, like his body was different and he was doing different things. Like he seems to be appearing and disappearing. People don't even recognize him. He seems to be like walking through locked doors. And I felt like there was a cool presentation of like post-death resurrection Neo is different and like sort of glorified.
Okay, so like one fun thing, I'm just gonna pop in
Please.
here. One fun thing in this whole film, the names. Oh my gosh, Charlie, the names. And Neo, which is Greek for new, because he's a new man, right? He's like the new order, and after he resurrects,
sure,
he's just like living this new life
the
that
new
like
man.
is kind of promised to us.
Interesting. That picks up actually on a little bit of a theme that I was thinking about, and maybe it's because right now in my I teach high school theology, and right now we just kind of finished up going through like how does Jesus fulfill all of the Old Testament covenants, and that's like one of the the main things that I think points us to like Christ is like, oh my gosh, God has given all these promises and all these prophecies in the Old Testament, and they all seem to point to Jesus, and like they all keep stacking up on him, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is the guy that's fulfilling everything. And like where all the previous ones have failed, like Christ succeeds. And they even use that language directly towards Neo, where I think it's Morpheus says like, where they have failed, you will succeed, towards Neo. So I didn't really realize that theme also being unpacked like in his name of like, he's the new fulfillment, like he's the new man.
He's the new guy,
which certainly is, I don't know, the theme of St. Paul picks up on that in Scripture of like in Adam all
Jesus
die.
is the new Adam.
And Jesus is the new Adam. Yeah, that like through Adam all die, but through Christ like all live, and he succeeds in rejecting sin where Adam like failed into it. So that's interesting. I didn't think much about the names. I do recognize in the front all the Christian names of Trinity and Nebuchadnezzar and
like there's a kind of way in which like this is really interesting, and thankfully the movie is well done, but like you can also be like a fiction author out there and just be like, I'm going to use Christian names because I'm edgy.
I didn't draw too much out of it. I thought it was interesting name choices, but I didn't draw too much significance from the titles.
I kind of drew some significance out, like for example, like the one who like pulls Neo out of himself for the first time, Trinity, like God actively seeking him,
pulling Neo out of himself. Oh, like drawing him from his software
development world,
sure.
Right? Morpheus, like the agent of change, change. And so there's like some really interesting stuff going on there. And I feel like Morpheus might even be like some kind of Greek story.
Sometimes I get to those and I'm just like, the door is red.
But so I really like the story of Neo too, and you talked about the end, which is incredible, like Paschal Mystery-esque. I'm really interested in like the conversion of Neo. Can we maybe touch on that a little bit? So like, tell me if this sounds like you. Staying up at night on the laptop, on the computer, looking for an answer, looking for a fill to the hunger.
Yeah.
That sounds like me sometimes. I don't know, like Neo is definitely like in this mode of like he is hungry for something, he is searching for something, and finally something finds him, and he has like this opportunity to react. Okay, he gets this like weird message from Trinity that's like, follow the white rabbit, which is like interesting. And then he goes to this club. Like, I'm not in it for the whole club scene that's in there and then the later movies, but he goes to this club and he like meets Trinity, and his life is like beginning to be changed. And then he ends up going back to the office, right? And like, how does that scene go down as you kind of remember?
Well, that's when they come to him and are like, you got to make a choice here. Like, you got to be on time, or like you're fired from this job. And then immediately, he gets a phone call that gives him instructions to go out the window and try to go up the scaffold, to which he fails. Yeah, and he's like invited to like, hey, I'm gonna, like, he gets this call from his hero, right, Morpheus, who he's been searching for this guy, and his Neo's Christ figure, if you will, and like
he can't follow him. He's like too scared to follow him. I just think it's so interesting.
Yeah,
right?
he stood out to me right there in that like initial failure. I appreciated. I think the first time I watched the film, I was like, oh, that was kind of nice to see. Like, I was expecting it to be this, like, I don't know. I was getting what's the movie with Shia LaBeouf where he's like Eagle Eye?
Eagle Eye. Yeah,
right?
for sure.
I was getting Eagle Eye vibes of like following this voice. It's like telling you what to do, and it was kind of cool to see like, oh, character fails right at the onset in that way. And it was a brief moment, but I did appreciate that like that's in there because I certainly see that one of the dominant like virtues that I think we need to uphold as Christians is like the virtue of hope, and especially hope like despite my own failures.
Yeah.
And I just see people in my life that like struggle and fail, and even myself, and it can be so easy to say like, wow, I messed this up once, so I'm just an abject, worthless failure, and I'm no good, and like God hates me, and I'm just going to consign myself to despair.
Yeah, and
But,
even if
like-
you don't think all that, there's like part of you that's like, yeah, I missed my shot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I thought that was good. That's just a small note that I thought was
Yeah.
enjoyable. I do want to actually like, can I read just that moment where Trinity is like, I know what you've been doing. I know you hardly sleep. Because I think that the writing is
Yeah.
just well
So this
done.
is so just to be clear, this is when Trinity and Neo are first meeting
In the bar.
and like in the bar, and he's like there because he thinks that she has an answer for him.
Yeah.
So yeah, go for it.
Which also, like, the bar scene, not my favorite. Like, at least, I don't know, some of the maybe sexualized drinking atmosphere was a little bit
Yeah,
extra.
the whole like cyberpunk deal, like it's like kind of interesting, but it's mostly not. to
I've
me.
never, like, it's never been my art style. I don't think there's anything objectively bad by the cyberpunk style, but it can't have, like, an overly sexualized sort of
Yeah,
atmosphere.
yeah.
There was, like, it wasn't overly terrible, but there was, like, I
Yeah,
feel like in the
and
background there was some
in the
themes.
later movies it will be.
Okay, I haven't seen the later ones yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly there's a tendency for some problems there.
All right. So put yourself in the scene.
I love this.
You are Neo. Charlie is Trinity. Go.
I know what you've been doing. I know why you hardly sleep. I know why you live alone and why night after night you sit at your computer. You're looking for him. I know because I was once looking for the same thing. And when he found me, he told me that I wasn't really looking for him. I was looking for an answer. It's the question that drives us, Neo. It's the question that brought you here. You know the question just as I did. The answer is out there, Neo. It's looking for you. And it will find you if you want it to. Okay, beautiful writing. So awesome.
It is really dope. It's
dope.
really
It's
cool.
awesome. I do have like some agreements and then some like difficulties that threw out right on off the bat to me.
Yeah.
But I'll send it to you first, like because I'm intrigued to see if you picked up on some
Sure,
similar ideas
sure.
that I did.
So
Just on that phrasing, like, is there stuff that you
yeah.
feel like?
So I really like. So one thing that I like is like, it's obvious that you're searching. Okay, and the search is like the universal human desire, and you're searching for him, which is like kind of like, hey, you think that a person is going to solve this like thing that you have. And Neo's been looking for Morpheus. You and I, when we say we're searching for him, we're looking for like a relationship with God who loves us. And Trinity, like, she goes back to say like, oh, you're actually more interested in answering the question. And like, for us, like as Christians, the answer to the question is like literally the person of God.
Yeah. Okay, I picked up on the same
And
thing
then-
that you were.
and
talking
so
about. Yeah.
that's maybe the difference, but like the theme of longing and like desperately longing for that is, yeah, I think spot on.
Yeah, and I think it's certainly it's an interesting presentation there that like the Christian pursuit is not just for truth, but the fact that it is the pursuit of truth, but truth is a person. That even Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." So we cannot separate like Trinity does here. There's the pursuit of him, but then really beyond him is truth. And as Christians, we believe that truth was like made flesh, and truth was made into a like truth
Yeah.
is a person.
And
so,
that's what's so unique about Christianity than
Yeah.
every other religion. It's like, well, our religion is about a guy
Yep.
who like actually said, "Follow me, not follow my way, but follow me."
Yeah, and to throw that into, I think, like tangible stuff, like I feel like there's been more and more gray situations popping up in my life and trying to figure out, like, even lately, like copyright laws and figuring out stuff for this podcast and whatever else. Just things I'm trying to figure out, like, what is the ethical, moral way to go about this? And especially with the advent of AI, where I feel like I can Google things and get generally decent, like, answers for stuff, I'm kind of noticing there's a temptation for me to, when I have a Christian moral question, I can go to like, there's some cool sources out there like Magisterium AI and like ChatGPT that I can kind of ask it, like, give me some sources or some things to like basically answer this from a Catholic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And there's sort of a tendency to like flee from my prayer life and just like ask the questions that I have
Yeah.
to get moral answers from ChatGPT or these
Yeah.
things. And for the most part, like they actually give me some
I totally
sources.
see
And, like,
that.
you got to be careful, right? And I'm like with AI, don't just trust what it says, but like, is it actually giving you some sources that you can pull up and find answers to? But I've been noticing that in myself, and I have to kind of check, like, wow, okay, the Christian life is more than just a moral code of laws and like answers. It's also a lived relationship, and I'm noticing like I need to take that time to actually interact with Jesus. It's so easy for me as a theologian also to spend time like researching theology and questions that I sort of lose my relationship with him in like the silence and listening and encounter. So I just thought that that was very interesting, how Trinity is separating him and truth. And I'm kind of doing that a little bit with AI, which is very much
that's a
also,
good examination of conscience,
well,
for sure.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And certainly I'm trying to grow in that. Like I'm trying to overcome that. But the fact that the Matrix also has like AI is the big evil villain, like interesting. I don't think the AI is evil in all senses, but in that instance, it was kind of damaging my prayer life, and I got to check that. And how I'm using it in a balanced way there.
Yeah, very cool, Charlie. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks. Matthew 7:7. Ask and it will be given you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. Thought that was also fitting. To kind of conclude this little topic on like seeking him, I love this quote from St. John Paul II that I feel like a lot of people love, so I wanted to read it
Go for
off
it.
here to communicate this. St. John Paul II says, "It is Jesus that you seek when you dream of happiness. He is waiting for you when nothing else you find satisfies you. He is the beauty to which you are so attracted. It is he who provoked you with that thirst for fullness that will not let you settle for compromise. It is he who urges you to shed the mask of a false life. It is he who reads in your heart your most genuine choices, the choices that others try to stifle. It is Jesus who stirs in you the desire to do something great with your lives, the will to follow an ideal, the refusal to allow yourselves to be ground down by mediocrity, the courage to commit yourselves humbly and patiently to improving yourselves and society, making the world more human and more fraternal." Gotta say, as I read that, that sounds very Matrix. I feel like it's a very fitting quote for what's happening here.
I love John Paul II.
He's dope. He's awesome.
Oh, Lord, thank you for the gift of him. Yeah, what do I want to say about that? Neo is a really interesting case study. His like kind of counter in the show is Cypher, right?
Sure.
And the movie is Cypher, and I like you see like this like Neo who's like really undergoing this conversion, and like he's like beginning it, and like but he's gonna go for it, right? Throughout the course of the movie, he's gonna go for it. I love. I wanted to read to you that line that I found earlier.
Sure.
It was he's in the car with Trinity and some others. Sorry, everyone gotta.
Oh, this
let
is so
AI check
what,
my
they're,
face.
They're under the bridge. He was invited to meet them in the car.
Yeah, and they get the bug out of
horrifying,
him, which is like,
oh my gosh.
and you're like original sin. And then so it's kind of interesting. But he's about to get out of the car and go home and like go back to his old life. And Trinity says this: "You've been down there, Neo. You know that road and exactly where it ends. And I know that's not where you want to be." Oh my God.
Love that. I honestly heard that and I was like, and actually I'm looking at an image that somebody has already made, but I was like, someone needs to put that on an image. And you just need to put that on your wall. And whenever you're encountering temptation towards any kind of evil or sin, like read that in God's voice to you.
True.
You know where this is going to end. And I think it's been helpful for me to reject temptation at times, is to recall when I've given into this sin in the past, has it actually helped heal me or my relationships? And I recall the damage that it did and try to like, and I think it's the power of journaling, is like, if I can remember where this road led me,
yeah,
hopefully that will impact my future decisions.
And I think for me, I got off of social media a long time ago. And that was like I wasn't super addicted at the time, but like something that I would find is like, I would just do that, like that scroll up waiting for the next thing to like load, you know, like you would hit the scroll and then like, new stuff pops up. Yeah. And then like sometimes you would wait there and there would be nothing new. And I would just think to myself, I don't want this, you know? And so like it can be a sin, but it can also just be like some kind of empty attachment.
Yeah.
It can be any number of things. And like, but guess, like, the good news is that like there is a place that you do want to be.
Yeah.
Like with Christ and with others and choosing them and choosing joy. Yeah. So I just love that line. But contrary wise, are you ready to talk about Cypher a little bit, or do you want to stick on Neo for a
No,
while?
Cypher's good. You were making me think about my like YouTube
Yeah, go for
choices
it.
lately. I just feel like when I get stressed with stuff lately, I know that I'm going to YouTube and just clicking on the homepage, and the algorithms are excellent because it's recommending me everything
So
that I find
true.
interesting. And oh my gosh, just every time I know, like going to YouTube, I'm going to waste time. I'm going to be distracted. But man, does it like take away my anxiety and my stress for the moment. And then it comes right back, like when I'm done with YouTube, like, and then like all the responsibilities are still there. And I gotta like this line of like, I know where this has led before. It's not going to help me. It's not going to take away my problems. I got to enter into the problems and choose it as opposed to procrastination.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's true. Like always, like the only way out is through.
Yes.
And like through ends up being good, even though it's hard. But like what you made me think about with like the YouTube algorithms is, there's a quote from Agent Smith, representative robot AI. The minute we started thinking for you, it became our world.
Mm.
And like I think about the
I don't
YouTube,
remember him saying that. That's good, actually. Though I don't remember
like
that in the film.
think about the YouTube algorithm. You're like,
Yeah.
it does think for me. It chooses what I watch. Ooh, spooky. There's like definitely some demonic stuff going on in there, but yeah.
I think it's to give this YouTuber some like serious credit. I have really enjoyed like I feel like in the early days of ChatGPT coming out, I saw this video on Nerdwriter 1.
Okay. Nerdwriter 1.
Nerdwriter 1. He's like one of my favorite video essayists. If you want a guy that's just like unpacking like films and paintings and just like good art, like he's awesome. He just needs to like I want to have a podcast episode with him someday. Anyways,
yeah.
he has a check out his video, The Real Danger of ChatGPT. He's the only one that I really felt like explained this. And when I work in high school theology, and so I'm in the academic system, and certainly the main danger is like using it for cheating, and like just submitting AI work. But he unpacks a real danger here, which goes to what you said. It was like when we started thinking for you, it became our world, and he unpacks kind of the danger of if I'm going to ChatGPT or like AI, just even for like a starting point to like, oh my gosh, I'm looking at a blank white piece of page and I just don't know how to start. I have my ideas, but I want to like kind of go to ChatGPT to like get me going. Well, that could be good. He points out that the danger there is you're now switching writing for editing. And he's like, the difference between writing and editing is like the difference between writing and reading. And so the notion of like staring at a white piece of paper and having the difficulty of where do I start, that is where human creativity can like solve new problems. And if I'm going to AI to be like, I just want you to get me started and like plan this out for me. I don't know. He just kind of unpacked in a way that if you let AI start your work and then you just edit the AI's content, it could be damaging. I'm not to say that that's always bad in every single instance.
No, I totally
like,
hear what you're saying.
I use it for stuff to like when I'm just stressed and like I'm overthinking lesson plans. Sometimes taking my content and throwing it at ChatGPT and saying like, help me think through some lesson plan like ideas of how to structure it is helpful for me because like my main job is to express the content well and help them get through it. So
for sure.
There's a balance. But anyways, I just as you were saying like AI thinking for me that came up. You should check out that video. It's a pretty good exploration.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, and I totally agree. I think one of the things that has been coming up in my mind recently is like what makes me human. It's a lot of things. It's my DNA, etc. But it's one of the things is like that I can create. Like dogs can't just create like I can create. And like what I create might not be totally original, but like it's one of the ways that I'm an image of God in the world. And so it's actually important, you artists out there, that you create. And it's important that I create and that Charlie creates, because we have a responsibility to like have a deep interior life and share that interior life as a way of reflecting God's goodness in the world. And that's something that dogs and cats can't do.
I feel like this is where one of my students steps in and is like, Mr. Wessel, have you ever heard about the white spotted pufferfish that also creates and makes art? And I'm like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. But have you heard about this fish?
No. Tell me about a white spotted pufferfish.
I think it's interesting.
Oh my gosh.
But
I'm about to be hacked by a pufferfish.
I think it's pronounced mandala. The like, symmetrical looking shapes and stuff.
I do know about this.
Yeah, there's just like fish that I think it's like for mating ritualistic purposes, like we'll carve these like mandalas into
That's so interesting.
sand,
wow.
which is fascinating. Which on the one hand you're like, wow, then what am I as a human? Like if a fish makes art, what am I doing? But I think it's actually kind of beautiful that like even animals are expressing some level of creativity for the sake of inviting a significant other. It's like, man, you should be doing at least that of a pufferfish then. Like, come on, if they're like, doing creative works for their beloveds, like we got to do the same. Like, learn some poetry, like get some flowers and romantic settings, and I got to challenge myself on that and do better in being creative in my love.
Yeah, very true.
Fun reference. Certainly, they're not creating nearly to the capacity that humans can.
Yeah, check out our link below where Charlie and I host a masterclass on creating mandalas like fish for the sake of love.
Yeah, and if you find the latest episode where a white spotted pufferfish makes a podcast unpacking the themes of Christianity in the Matrix, then that'll be really truly something.
Yeah, that would be wild. Hey.
Anyways.
Okay, so I really want to talk about Cypher. Because like Cypher, he's like kind of the opposite of Neo. And just to kind of recall in the film, you're like, who's Cypher? He's that guy that's got kind of like the nice mustache beard thing, and he's kind of bald. But he also like his kind of role is like he's in cahoots with Agent Smith. He's in cahoots with the Matrix folk, and he is going to turn in Neo and Morpheus to the Matrix folk in exchange for getting plugged back into the Matrix, which is like, oh no, like Cypher, we've got a mole on the inside. And I was just thinking about that John Paul II quote you were writing. It's like, or you were reading, and like, don't settle for anything less than reality. And there's this poignant scene where Cypher is out to dinner with Agent Smith, and he says like, I know that this steak isn't real.
Fascinating scene.
But it still makes my mouth water. And at the end of the day, I don't care if it's real. And like, there's like a part of my heart that like just broke in that scene for Cypher, because like I also know that like when I sin, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Like I'm settling for something that's not real. That's not real love. Some kind of false love. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I feel like take any, well-known addiction also, like alcohol or drugs or pornography or shopping, whatever it may be, and just saying that too, like, I know this isn't even like real satisfaction, but like I don't care and I want it anyways. Like I feel like I totally see that in myself. Like when I think it's a fascinating portrayal. And I think it's also, I feel like there's been times where I've almost sensed that temptation that Cypher presents. It's like, dang, the Christian way is hard. Like I'm invited because I like understand the truth here, like, and I understand the moral commandments that God has given me, like to live them is difficult. And sometimes there's this temptation, I feel like in the back of my mind, that's like, dang, if you just could dismiss all of these things, like life would just be easier for me to choose what I want to do at any point and like just throw off the difficulty of ethics and morality, and like certainly that's a temptation, right? I'm not saying that that's good, but I recognize that like that can be there,
and it is I fully agree.
And so like and that like would damage my life ultimately, and like real life is actually found in sacrifice and taking up our cross. But I felt that temptation they wrote into Cypher was particularly wise.
Yeah,
like I feel like typically villains don't always have a motivation that I like connect with, and that one was like, dang, what a fascinating motivation that I need to reflect on in myself.
Yeah, and maybe to just like share like a quick story, which is related to yours, is like, like I just wish that I could like let this go, let this Christianity go, and like following Christianity is like sometimes it's joyful and fun, and like other times it's really hard because like there are a lot of goods in the world that you have to set aside and say like, hey, like either not now or not ever. Like this is just not the kind of thing that I can do. And so I remember when I was in seminary for a while, I was going through like a particularly like dark night of the soul experience of like everything. I was just so sad all the time. And like I remember just being like why am I here? Like, and I felt pretty convicted that I should still be in seminary at that time. But I was so mad at the Lord. And I was like, Lord, I've come here to follow you, and like I am getting nothing back. And I remember writing in my journal, like, Lord, I still love you, but there are some days that Christianity is a fate that I would not wish on my worst enemies.
That's a quote.
And you're like, okay, man, like, how sad were you? Like, apparently pretty sad. But like, there's something also like very, very like demonically true about like that quote is like, hey, like, it would be so much easier if you just let all of that go and lived according to whatever your passing emotion was. And like, what's the antidote to that? To know that you're loved. And like, thankfully, like the Lord reminded me that I am deeply loved no matter what. But like, I still like, I feel the weight of that day that I like looked myself in the face and said like, hey, like I don't want this. Right.
Who's the saint?
Thankfully, the Lord didn't let me go. So.
Who's the saint that says something along the lines of like, I feel like they had some suffering happen to them and they were like, God, if this is the way that you like treat your friends, it's no wonder you like don't have.
It's no wonder you don't have more of them. Yeah, I don't remember who that was.
I don't remember who that is.
It's a pretty hilarious quote though.
Maybe
a Philip Neri quote. Who's to say? Probably Joan of Arc. Probably. I want to say it's Therese of Lisieux.
I was gonna see if it was Therese of Lisieux or something. If this is how you treat your friends, no wonder. Quick Google search says Saint Teresa of Avila.
Saint Teresa of Avila. Yeah, that'll do it. Yeah, shout out to our friend Grace, who really likes Saint Teresa of Avila, quote unquote. She's based.
But okay, I am finding, to retract on that, I'm finding articles that immediately are like, is this real? Is this a real story? Maybe I need to check myself. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna do some more research.
We're gonna ask AI about that, and we'll get back to you.
We'll get back to you. But I feel like this is a very wise point in that maybe the quote I just shared is not even real and not an accurate representation of our theology. So make sure we are.
Yeah, I think it's mostly
research.
Just a funny quote.
It is a funny quote. Yeah, thanks for sharing that too.
Yeah,
it was a powerful experience and certainly sacred ground.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, learn from my mistake.
Yeah,
please.
I think that to me also on Cypher's temptation is just fascinating that he says like, you call this free, like all I do is what he tells me to do. And I'm talking about like Morpheus.
Yeah.
And what a fascinating expression of freedom there. Because the Christian notion of freedom is certainly that like I am free from sin and I actually like in a sense become a slave to Christ and like my will is aligned to his. And even Jesus, who is God, said like, not my will be done, but the will of the Father. And so what a fascinating thing to say that God submitted his will to somebody else's, like within the Trinity in himself. Like there's submission on the part of God. So there should be submission in me. And so like for me to be fully alive and fully human is actually to be obedient and like sometimes do what other people tell me to do if it's actually good and right, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
We don't have a moral obligation to like follow unjust laws. If somebody tells us to do something unjust, we ought not to follow that. But I thought that was a fascinating thing. Made me think of, you know, maybe like the older brother in the prodigal son story of this son who's like, God, I just like, Father, I've done what you have asked me to do. And I'm frustrated like by sort of just like obedience. And he's not understanding like the call to like relationship. And I think there's something there. Anyways.
Yeah. And I just think more and more in my life recently, there's been a real call to like if you're frustrated, if for some reason you're frustrated with like the fact that you have to pray or live a certain way because you're Christian, probably the source of your frustration is you don't realize how loved you are, you know? And like, that's like what the father of the older son immediately invites him to. He's like, everything I've always had is yours, man.
Like,
you
just
you
ask
can't
for
forget it. You can't forget it.
Yeah.
So
Something, and this is the last point I'll share on Cypher, that I thought was very interesting on my second watch through of the film. He's talking about, like, in the Matrix, even, like, things can be more real than they are here. And he's killing off some of the other teammates, like APOC and I can't remember the other Switch. And he talks, and this was fascinating to me, he talks about how, like, on his end, all he's doing is just unplugging a cable, and he doesn't see any, like, visceral thing happen, but, like, he's like, in the Matrix, you're gonna see him drop dead. And to him, like, it seemed like it was easier for him to kill because it had no, like, manifestation of looking like killing. But in the Matrix, it showed their bodies, like, crumpling, and he's like, you got to watch them die. But here, I'm just unplugging. Wow. To me, my brain immediately went to, like, euthanasia and abortion. I know those are bigger topics.
To those extremely sterilized form of killing.
Correct. Yeah, and I think that is a fascinating point to me, that it was easier to kill when it's sterilized, and when I can sedate somebody, or when it's hidden from my eyes and I don't see, like, a reaction, somehow we think it's easier to do that.
Yeah.
And I know those are really heavy topics, but certainly, like, I believe that those are like euthanasia and abortion are not goods.
They are evils.
And that they are evils. But anyways, fascinating.
Yeah.
And I whenever those things come up, I come back also to the wisdom of Dr. Seuss. A person's a person, no matter how small, or no matter how they appear to me. And I think that was an interesting reflection of, like, it's not the outward manifestation of them, like, screaming in pain that makes it wrong. I just ought to treat humans with dignity because they're humans.
Yeah.
Regardless of their external response to stimuli.
Yeah, I think maybe to kind of bring this back towards, like, the main story a bit, is, like, what is the really real world for the Christian? And I think this is, like, a really important topic that, like, not every Christian gets. So this, like, might be you, is, like, I think what we would have to say is the really real world is, like, the one where the visible walk among the invisible. Like, there are myriad spiritual realities around me. There are angels and demons at my side. Now, are they physical? No, they're not physical, right? So I can't see them. But also, I believe that they're there, and I believe that they're actually working for and against me. And, like, God is really real. And, like, the saints, they watch me, and they cheer for me. And, like, they do all kinds of things in relationship with me, but I can't see them. And so I, in one sense, live in the Matrix still because I can't see so many things. But even by being connected to Christ, by becoming a member of his body through baptism, I'm starting to live in that spiritually real world. Yeah. And I just think that's really important to, like, any degree of Christianity is, like, Christianity is not something we do because it's good to do. Christianity is something we do because we can't help but live really in reality.
One other thing that you were just talking about that reminds me of a recent podcast, to give another nod to some other amazing podcasters. I've actually only listened to one episode of this, but I really liked the episode on the Sean Ryan show. Have you ever listened to that podcast
I've
before?
heard of Sean Ryan. I've not listened to the podcast.
I'm actually not familiar with him other than this episode, but he interviewed Father Dan Rehill, who's a Catholic priest and exorcist.
Okay.
And he was just giving a very interesting explanation on, like, the spiritual world, as you were just talking about, that I feel like I also noticed a couple of connections in where the Matrix could be, like, misinterpreted in an unhealthy way. And I'll first present what Father Dan said. He was talking about, like, sometimes people will go to, like, a medium or somebody to, like, communicate with the dead.
Yeah.
And they'll, like, hear something that, like, oh my gosh, like, my grandma died, like, several years ago, and when I went to the medium, like, the medium told me something that grandma told me. And so she's actually communicating with grandma because, grandma is the only person that would know that. And he kind of chimed in here and was like, actually, no, that's not the case. He's like, actually, the angels and demons and, like, the saints are like the demons are around us and watching us. And, like, they actually have some level of intelligence. Like, even, Satan, like, they know the scriptures, but, like, they don't give their will and they give their assent to God. But anyways, he was talking about like when I go to a medium, like it's not grandma who's talking to me. He's like, it very well might be a demon that knows everything about grandma, but they're going to tell you things that only grandma would know, and you believe it
So
to be
as to
grandma.
gain your trust.
Yeah, and he even, he's very compassionate the way he presents it. Is that like the medium themselves might even think that it's grandma, and they might not be intentionally trying to deceive you, but everybody is being deceived by the fact that you don't actually know what you're interacting with, and you have no concrete proof, like when the demons can also present information. So I just thought that was a
That's
fascinating...
a great point. I've never thought of that.
I've never thought about that either. And that was basically his way of presenting why the church condemns. The word condemn is just saying like this is not good and it doesn't lead us to God. Of like the things of the occult, which would be like palm readings and crystal balls and tarot cards and Ouija boards, because I'm reaching out to the spirits that be and asking for some kind of information, but it very well might be an evil spirit speaking to me, and I don't want to let anything into my home. Like I only want good spirits and God to communicate with me.
Yeah.
And I thought that was fascinating, and I just wanted to share a point on that because I also feel like there was a little bit of where you could be mystified by the oracle, and even when the oracle is like checking out and divining knowledge about whether Neo is the one, she like checks his ears first, and then kind of like checks his palms and seems to like read his palms and sort of give the reading, and like, okay, from a Catholic Christian perspective, we would reject any notion of like palm readings and trying to find information in that way. And that's kind of like a little bit of a rationale as to why. You could hear Father Dan Rehill on that podcast talk more about it, but there's plenty of exorcists that would talk into like the occult and why we reject those things is because there is actually spirits that be. We don't see it, but they are real and they can deceive us quite readily.
Yeah. And I think like one thing to remember just like about demons in general is that like they're made in such a way that they're smarter than me. Like I really like this quote. So in case you haven't picked up the direct connections yet, the demons in the movie are the agents. Okay, so here's like an actual
Make
quote.
A very strong allegorical point.
Here's like an actual quote from Agent Smith in the movie. Maybe this is not an actual quote. Notice though this like facet of the movie.
Quote summary facet.
All of the agents are smarter and faster than all of the humans until Neo finally unplugs himself from the Matrix.
Yeah.
Okay. The demons talk about how this is our perfect world. The Matrix is like their world. Okay. And the humans that are like kind of like they're using it to fuel like their own game. Jesus even talks about the earth as like Satan as the Lord of this world. All right. And a reason that Jesus came was to break the power of the evil one. And so like the agents, like they're like trying to like kind of do this thing where they deceive all of these humans for their own like kind of personal gain.
Yeah.
Right. And what's the personal gain of like the agents is like they want batteries, right? But what's the personal gain of like demons that actually affect you? They hate God so much that they want to live out that hate by hurting you and hurting me. And like they're smarter than you and they're faster than you, but they're not more powerful than you necessarily if you're a Christian with an active prayer life and like actually like you're tapping into the really real world of the angels.
Yeah, there's no fear of the
Lord.
demons when I have an active sacramental life of the church following Christ as he invites us to the Christian life.
Yeah,
like,
so true.
Satan is destroyed at the hands of Christ.
Yeah, but it's like it's very important for us to just remember that those realities are going on around us all the time. And like that's not to scare you, but it's just like remind you. Like this is just the real world. So like be awake to everything that's going on around you, even though like in this movie the good guys are losing like almost the whole time. In the real world, like we're winning almost the whole time, but we're like obviously trying to grab more people away from this matrix, away from this kind of like pattern of sin and destructiveness that they're trapped in, you know?
Red pill, blue pill.
Red pill, blue pill, hey?
I just have to say, from an artistic perspective, what a incredible accomplishment on the hands of an artist that your writing and artwork in a film is now like the reference like your language has impacted
That guy's
culture
a blue pill.
around the world, like taking the blue pill or like, going down the rabbit hole and seeing how far it goes, like Alice in Wonderland and The Matrix. Wow. You guys, whoever wrote those stories, you've given us like, it's amazing to see
Pretty cool.
Like one human's artwork impacting culture. I was just watching that and I was like, man, if like, what a beautiful accomplishment to see that. It's so fascinating. And I will say, I am very confused by how the terms have gotten used today, because people around me are using the term red pill now more in regards to like men that look down upon women. I don't know if you've heard this reference.
I am not familiar with that
If somebody can
reference.
explain where this is coming from.
Okay, so
I
maybe
don't.
I'm not going to go very far aside, but like there's like a current there, like years ago there was like, please excuse your toxic masculinity at the door. But there actually is like kind of a strain of toxic masculinity kind of like rearing its head right now.
Yeah.
And just like pray for an end to that which is toxic, but also an authentic femininity and masculinity which free the hearts of both.
Yeah. So if somebody can help me understand, like it seems like to Google, red pilling is a term used in masculinist communities, taking the red pill, which describes awakening to the fact, quote unquote, that women are vain and select their partners solely on genetically determined physical attributes.
Yikes.
Which is interesting. I was just a little confused as to how red pill even got attributed to that. I don't really have thoughts on unpacking all that right now. But
because I guess like
I thought the blue pill is the one that awakens him to the truth. Is that right, or is it's flip flopped?
that's flip flopped.
Red one is the one that opens him to the truth, and blue is the one he would have taken if
Blue means stay calm. Yeah.
Okay.
If you will. That's a way that I'm remembering.
Okay, then I understand where they're coming from a little bit more, and that they're saying that they're awakened to some weird and sad.
I have thoughts on that, but maybe not in the context of this particular podcast.
Yeah.
So save it.
Man,
save it, everyone.
These women are created as beautiful equals in the eyes of God, and so
and I think the other thing is like, I think probably whoever came up with that probably just in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
So pray for you today.
Other things you wanted to hit. I had a smattering of just other thoughts.
Go for it.
I'll jump into the original sin. I was originally listening to part of this, and I was like, this is a stretch. Like, am I trying to fit original sin here? It doesn't work. And then I kept going, and I was like, dang, I think it's actually...
No, it's for sure in there.
Maybe I'm stretching. Maybe the door is just red, and I'm reaching here.
Okay, so Catholics believe that everyone is born with a disease in their spiritual DNA
called original sin
that separates them from God and corrupts their nature to a certain extent.
Yeah, and so, like, St. Paul talks about this in Scripture where he says, like, in Adam, all die. And we've like all been made sinners in Adam, but through one man, Christ, like we're all made righteous, and like we are all saved by one man's decision. So the original sin by itself, this notion that I am born into the world in like a state of sin, not that I'm guilty of personal sin, right? You have to have like reason and choice and intellect to be able to choose wrong, but we are born into a state of sin. I intrinsically am good. It doesn't mean I'm intrinsically bad. I'm intrinsically good, but I'm still born into this like this state of not being in union with God at my birth. And baptism, we believe, is a gift that Christ has given that like cleanses us of that.
It makes us a new creation. And heals that disease in our spiritual DNA to an extent in this life.
And it's very much, even in the prayers of baptism, we recall like the flood of Noah, and that like in the floodwaters of Noah, like sin was washed away. And so in the floodwaters of Christ, like we enter into Jesus' death and are like, the whole death motif. And anyways, you can look up the prayers of Christian baptism. It's fascinating.
It's awesome.
In the Catholic Church. But
so here's where it connects to the Matrix.
He's talking to, I think that they're in one of the programs. Maybe it's when the girl in the red dress walks by, that one.
Red dress program,
Red dress program, where I think Morpheus here is talking to Neo, and this was my writing it down as it was happening, so it's not an exact quote, but it's as close as I could get it. It was like, you know something is wrong. You can't explain it, but you feel it. Something's wrong with the world, and this feeling has brought you to me. That you're a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, into a prison that you cannot taste or see or touch, a prison for your mind. I thought it was fascinating, actually.
Really cool.
Really good. And I would say, okay, is original sin a prison of my mind? In one sense, yes.
Partially.
We actually do believe as Christians that like as I choose sin, it actually harms my ability to see the truth,
Which is so wild.
which is fascinating. And that, like, the more I live in the dark, the more I will see the dark as the light and the light as the dark. And my whole notion of morality and goodness can flip-flop in that, like, I see the truth as a lie and the lie as a truth. And I think that that's actually, Bishop Barron has helped me unpack that. That's kind of the sin, I think, that's being beautifully, poetically presented in the Garden of Eden, that God ordained this is good and this is bad. So eat the tree of life. Do not eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And their decision to, like, take it for themselves was really the decision to say, like, I am going to decide for myself what is right and what is wrong. Like, I will be the arbiter of good and bad. And in that, like, we have confused things so backwards. Yeah. So that's the result of sin is actually, yes, it is a prison for my mind, but it's also a prison for my will and for my soul and for my body. Like, it's encapsulating that sin, like, especially harms my will, and that, like, I am not as free to love. Like, when I am bound to want to be selfish and self-entitled, and I want to be proven right all the time, and I have that kind of pride, when I need to say I'm sorry and give forgiveness to my beloved, and I need to operate out of, like, kindness, I have, like, an inability to, like, I can't be sweet and kind and emotionally pure because I want to be proven right. It's like, that's, I think, the bondage of where, like, my ability to love is being harmed by my encounter with sin. So I thought that was a really beautiful presentation on, like, original sin and just sin in general, that it is a bondage.
Yeah.
And it's not everybody sees it. And I've had people in my life that are like, what do I need saving from? What does Christ need to save me from? And I thought that was a fascinating question.
Yeah.
And the fact that I think I saw it with that was like, okay, maybe I'm not even aware of where I need saved in my life. And I'm not aware of the bondage of sin present within me, and where I need him setting me free, or where it has been. So anyways, I thought that was a fascinating presentation.
I think that's where, like, the spirit, like, knowledge of the spiritual realm comes in, is like, yeah, I can't see in the day-to-day that I'm in bondage necessarily. Like, can I figure it out at some points? I think I can. But, like, in the day-to-day, like, I don't keenly feel like I live in middle-class America. I don't keenly feel the need for a savior every day. But, like, there's also, like, when I start to first get into, like, patterns of sin, like, and you see this a lot with addicts too, is, like, a lot of addicts turn wholeheartedly towards the Lord at some point in their life because they realize, like, just how, like, how much they can't figure it all out.
Yeah.
And I think for us, like, at least an initial step, the one you're describing, is like, I see that I want to try to love, but I can't love disinterestedly. And that's like a piece of it, but it's obviously not the whole. That's only an expression of an interior brokenness that, like, exists in the spiritual realm.
Oh goodness, there was a thought that's escaping me. I will try to come back to it. I've lost it. Yeah. If you have another.
Yeah, I might have a thought on original sin. The baptism imagery. So he, like, eats the red pill, okay? And and he can't go back afterward, and he wakes up in this, like, pool of water. And I was like,
I didn't think of any.
And then he gets dumped into a pool of water. And I just kind of thought that was fun, because, like, you know, water, always baptism imagery.
Transition from bondage into freedom of the truth by way of water.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating
portrayal. Yeah, and, like, he almost drowns, and, like, he kind of drowns, but then he's saved, right?
Yeah, to which I'm immediately like, dude, if your muscles are atrophied, how you doing?
Are you treading water at all?
What's going on?
Yeah.
For the sake of the plot.
But I did love, like, the, like, post, like, he has to recover for weeks after his baptism, his, like, escape from the Matrix, because it says, like, your eyes have never seen and your muscles have never been used.
That was fascinating.
That was actually such a cool
of, like, my
line.
eyes hurt. He's like, you've never used them. I was like, whoa, what world are we looking at? I was like, oh my gosh. That writing was fantastic to me.
Guys, which I'm telling you, if you're not Catholic, become Catholic. See the world. It's amazing.
I think that, not that everything needs to be allegorically interpreted or an analogy, but Certainly, I think that like in the early stages of like faith, you know, like it can be difficult to see with eyes of faith, and that like the more one prays, the more one encounters God. Like the easier we're able to live out of it. It's got to be like
Yeah.
developed habit and virtue.
Yeah, very true.
Early stages are painful, difficult.
Yeah, and
it can always be difficult.
And totally true. Like you, like even where like you and I are as like hey, we're teaching theology, we know a lot about Christianity. Like there are still things that like I have to learn from others because I don't see them quite yet. You know, like I still have to learn from Jacques Philippe. Like there is never an occasion to lose my peace, and I'm like, that's dumb, Jacques Philippe. Like how could you ever think that? The world still hurts. And he's like, because God loves you anyway, and like he would never will anything except for your good. And I'm talking about searching for and maintaining peace as an example.
Great
but
book.
but like it's because Jacques Philippe has lived this life and has allowed his like spiritual muscles to grow and spiritual eyes to grow. Like he can start leading the blind out of the cave. Because like in one sense, I'm out of the cave because I can go to heaven now. Like my soul can have communion with God. But in another sense, my mind and my will still need to be gradually saved. And that's important.
Yeah. Go check out Father Jacques
Philippe.
Father Jacques Philippe, Catholic spiritual writer, has great meditations and brief writings on interior freedom and searching for and maintaining interior peace.
Yeah.
Both are well fit to the Matrix on finding interior freedom.
Yeah.
Man, I really hope that this thought comes back to me because there was something that was really striking me. But I thought it was also fascinating that there's a little bit of some second coming vibes. I don't know if you picked up on this, but they
Actually,
talk about,
I did not
like,
pick up on that.
They have a quote where they share like, as long as the Matrix exists, humanity will not be free. And that like the Oracle or somebody has like predicted the return of the One and his coming would end the war and bring freedom. So we spend our time like looking for him. I was just like, wow, that's very much second coming. Like we do believe that Jesus has like come and set us free, but like in this world until his second coming arrives, like this fight is continuing. We're still like in the church militant. We're fighting here on earth. And at the end of time, at the second coming, like then the war of all things will come to an end, and like the bow will be broken and the spear snapped.
For sure. Yeah, I think something that was kind of like very like as we look at Neo at the end of the film, and we have like 2 more films to go. I don't think we're going to cover them necessarily, but
I haven't seen them yet.
Two deeper films, like you'll see this fight continue to happen. But I also like there was a thing that says like Neo is talking and he's like, they fear me now. And there's definitely like some second coming stuff there. Like when Christ comes back, he will make all things right. He will repay what needs to be repaid. But also like there's a way in which you and I also stand in the place of Neo, as like the demons fear our prayers. The demons can fear the prayers of the saints because like we actually love and they hate that. And they actually can't stand up to it if we have Christ with us.
Yeah, I certainly saw that like outro dialogue of like, they fear me now is very much like, oh yeah, like certainly like I think the demons and Satan fear and hate Christ, and they also hate all who follow him and like want to do them harm and want to keep them in bondage.
Yeah.
I did think though that in that outro dialogue, I don't know exactly, I don't have it written word for word, but it was talking about what like I introduced to you a world without control and like complete freedom, and like
that ain't great.
Where what you can, they said something along the lines of like where you can be anything or do anything. And on the one hand, I'm like, beautiful. On the other hand, not. On the one hand, I think that yes, like in the second coming, Jesus will, or like at the end of our life, like when we draw into heaven, like, yeah, we're not going to be under manipulation of like abuse and just the problems of this world and that kind of like unhealthy control. But like I'm not invited to do anything without laws and without barriers. Like that's not my call, you know. And we're certainly seeing in our world where people have kind of thrown objective morality and truth out the window and saying like, I can become anything I decide to be. And Like, that's just not true. Like, there are certain things I can't become, and there are limits that have been imposed on me by nature, by science, by just like morality. There's all sorts of things that I shouldn't do.
And I think something that recently I watched so I watch each trimester with my students a video on like the angels from Aquinas 101. And there's this really interesting piece that they talk about with like the angels are organized in a hierarchy, and like the seraphim and the cherubim, for example, really close to God, but like the angels and archangels, they're farther down on the list. But the role of the higher angels, they have greater power for knowing and loving God, and they are supposed to communicate that to the lower angels, and the lowest angels communicate that to us. Okay, so angels and archangels, which you and I are like archangels, those are like big deal. They're like 8th tier.
Pardon this interruption in the podcast as technical glitches deleted part of our conversation, requiring us to re-record the second half the following week. This is also a good time to mention that in addition to these podcasts, we have guided meditations for personal prayer based on a specific work of art, like The Matrix, if you'd like to join us for prayer. Those can be found in our Mystic Moments playlist. All right, picking up with our re-record of part 2 of our conversation. I don't know if you remember exactly the text dialogue of that moment, but it seems something along the lines of, I can't, like, where we can do anything we want to do and become anything we want to be. Do you remember exactly like the words?
I don't remember the exact words, but it's something like that. Like, we're creating a world without rules, without boundaries, without limits. And then he just kind of flies off into the distance to exemplify this, right?
I thought that there was something really beautiful about that, in that, like, you know, the tyranny and the shackles that they've been experiencing is now like thrown off of them, and so there's a beautiful sense of like freedom now that they're able to experience. But I thought that could be a point to talk into like what is freedom for a second too, and just like objective reality, because I think there's kind of a tendency in our world nowadays to say like I can be anything I want to be, and there are no limits that I need to follow or abide by. Yeah. And I think that could certainly be like a dangerous presentation. I think that's sort of what the Judeo-Christian story of Adam and Eve in the garden gets at, of like there were limits imposed upon us in being humans. We are not God. And so like, hey, there's a tree that we're not supposed to eat from, quote unquote, like there's limits that we have. So I think it could be unhealthy if we're going to say like, I have no limits and all is available to me. I don't think is a proper understanding of freedom. I think the best definition of freedom that I've heard is not to say that I can do anything I want to do, but to say that which makes me more like available to love is a really, I think, beautiful description of freedom. Yeah. On the one hand, if I define freedom as I'm free whenever I can do anything I want, then just like powerful Ubermensch, like Superman model is like, as long as I'm powerful and can oppress other people, like the tyrant would be the most free person because he can do anything he desires.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point.
But I think that there's something more beautiful in saying like, no, actually, even the tyrant who might have like certain like addictions and things, like a person who's just so addicted to alcohol, for just to take like a clear example there, like if duty right now requires him to serve his mother who's ill in the hospital, but like he's unable to be present to her because he needs to go and like get the bottle, like he's actually not interiorly free to love. And so like I could say that interiorly, like he's not a free man, and that there are actually like, it would be good for him to have to live in reality where like he's not free to just say, mom doesn't need me, I'm going to do whatever I want, but actually no, I'm free to serve my mother and serve in the confines of reality. And that in Christianity, like it's not just my will be done and I can do whatever I want, but even the fact that like God said, like Jesus said, like, Father, your will be done, you know, and it's about aligning my will to his. So I just thought that there was an interesting conversation on freedom that could be expressed there in the final ending, because I think America right now is presenting that freedom is I do whatever I want, when I think Christianity upholds I do what the Father wants.
Yeah,
and
that's really
different.
True. And I think like the kind of thing that in America that you're talking about, I do whatever I want to the extent that it doesn't harm other people. But that's like,
that's a fair consideration. I think it's fair that you throw that
like,
in there.
That's like, in one sense, like a fine metric for like just like a normal, like God-free society. But like Christianity is much different in that, like, even the most free person to ever walk the earth, which was like Jesus or maybe his mom, like their whole life, like their freedom came from like their submission to the will of the Father, like, and their freedom was like whatever happened to them and like whatever occurred and whatever they chose, like they always chose and said like, yeah, and I can still be happy. Like I don't need to impose my will to be happy. And that's like a really key thing. I don't need to impose my will to be happy. But there is like a sense in which like we're applauding Neo for like helping people to like see the truth, and that is going to make them more free. Seeing the truth of their situation, I think that's going to make them significantly more free to like make valuable choices. But I've been reading a lot of Jacques Philippe recently, and I've probably mentioned him already before, but he has this book, Interior Freedom, and basically the whole point is like, no matter what happens to me, like I can still be happy, and I'm still like, no one can take away joy from me. I can only allow it to be taken away from me by my own free choice. And so yeah, I just think about that, and I also think about like how beautiful is God's plan that like he gives us an ability to participate in loving others and in loving him, and we find ourselves like very naturally animated by loving others and loving him. And you see that already in Neo, right?
Yeah.
Because like, what is Neo's like first job? Neo's like, I control the Matrix now. Dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun, dun-dun, you know, like all the epic music. And what's he doing? He wants to tell people how to be free. You know, like his immediate response is not like, now I can seek after whatever pleasure I want. I want to tell people the truth, because that's what actually makes us free, of like wanting the truth, wanting goodness, wanting beauty for other people, and for them to be able to share and dwell in those goods with us. And that's like, yeah, like all of our freedom should be directed towards that end.
Yeah, it makes me think very much. I mean, like, I don't know, the Great Commission of Jesus commissioning his disciples to go out and to baptize and to spread the gospel is very much like ending point of Neo, that he's no longer just about his own small world, but is about like spreading the truth. Like that's his whole message, is like for the sake of other people, which is a beautiful ending note. It's like there's a beauty to his interest in just spreading truth to people.
Yeah.
On that point of freedom too, there's a story that I'm reminded of. I think it's from the book called The Exiles. I read like the opening 3 chapters in college, and then I learned enough for what I probably needed for the quiz, and sadly didn't finish the rest of the book off.
Yeah, that's how college
Mea
works
culpa,
sometimes.
my fault. I really wish I could redo a lot of college and like
College.
learn a lot more than I did. I could have drawn a lot more out of it. But in that story, I think it opens with like a religious sister who is, I think, in New York taking care of some people's needs. It's maybe somebody just had like a house fire or something. I don't remember what it is, but she's tending to some kind of trauma that's happening in front of her, and just really, truly loving the people in front of her. And it keeps kind of just noting the fact that like she really had to use the restroom. And it's kind of an odd detail and like an odd story that's not a thing that's often like necessarily expressed in a character as the need to use the restroom, but it kept showing the fact that she was sacrificing that personal bodily need that she had so that she could be available to these people right now that were going through a traumatic situation, and that she could love them and be with them and give them like a shoulder to cry on and just speak love and compassion to them. And like there's a certain kind of freedom there that she has, and that she is free to love even when her body is like inviting her to be elsewhere. Like she was willing to make a certain sacrifice out of love. And so there's a kind of freedom that woman was experiencing. And that's like such a small little sacrifice, but I'm sure that is like, it's fictional, I believe, but like that's a sacrifice that if real, like is certainly known to God and like matters and is beautiful. So I thought that was a really cool presentation of freedom. I've mastered my body such that I am free to love.
Yeah.
I thought that was powerful.
For sure. I love that.
I wanted to throw it back to you because I know this is our, after our interruption point that we had a couple of minutes ago. You were talking about the hierarchy of angels and like service and dominion in this realm of the outro and with freedom. And I can't remember how you picked up on the angel hierarchy piece, but I thought it was interesting. I wanted to give some space for that.
So like, yeah, there's a video that I watch with my students from Aquinas 101, which has like fantastic. Yeah, it's a wonderful channel that the Thomistic Institute has put together. But But we watch a video on angels and demons, kind of like Angels 101, I think is the name of the video. I'll try to link it in the show notes. But the basic point of it is just to like talk about what is going on with the angels and like how they love. Because like one of the things that is like very like Satan is like, I'm not going to serve God.
Sure.
And that's the thing that like makes Satan like particularly evil. Like he knows how good God is. He like has the capacity for loving God, but instead he wants to thwart God's plan. And so like the angels, just like humans, are free. But like what the point of their freedom is to like love and serve God. And like the highest angels love and serve God more kind of than the lower angels. And so like just like a really interesting piece that we see like in freedom is like the more free that I become, like the less reliant I am on like my passing emotional or physical appetites, like the more availability I have to like serve other people, and in doing so like fulfill like God's dream for me and fulfill really my soul. And so, yeah, I think this concept of like sharing in God's dominion is really important. And like we can even look at the scriptures and like say like Jesus's disciples come up to him and they're like, "Hey, we brought you some food," and he's like, "I have had food to eat of which you do not know." And he had not been eating food in the scene. He was like telling someone else about himself in the previous scene. And it says in the scriptures, "My food is to do the will of the one who sent me." And so there's like a kind of like hyper freedom that we can achieve too. What do I mean by hyper freedom? There's a kind of like real spiritual freedom that we can start achieving too if we take those words of the gospel seriously. Like if I can really just find God's will and do it, like that is the most free that I will ever be. And many of the angels feel that way, and they're trying to communicate that to us. Yeah. And that's why the demons are so wretched, because they've, in one sense, given away their freedom by choosing not to love God, giving away their most enriched self, so to speak.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm reminded of a story that I'd love to share on Jason Shanks. Did you go to Theology on Tap this past summer?
No,
Okay.
Yeah, I went one time, but not with Jason Shanks.
So Theology on Tap, I believe, is a national thing. But it's pretty popular in the city that we're in. It has a pretty good following. Basically, it's some theological speaker will come in, and it's a young adult event that has like an open bar, and people can just come and like mingle and socialize. And Jason Shanks was one of the speakers. I believe he is the CEO or he worked on the Eucharistic Congress that was taking place in Indianapolis, Indiana in 2024. And he was sharing the story of a really serious trauma that he went through that I believe was during COVID. I don't remember all the details, and I really only remember this piece of it where he was in like a medically induced coma, or his body just went into a coma after this illness that he was going through.
Okay.
I can't remember all the details of how he arrived in the coma specifically, but I was really fascinated by the fact that he was in this coma for a very long time. And when he was like coming out of this coma and waking up, he had a really hard time sort of figuring out what reality was, which is a very matrixy question here, and that he'd been living kind of this like alternate reality with like different people around him and different responsibilities, and like it was a different world for him. And so when he came back to like the real world, it was very disorienting, and he had a hard time figuring out which one was the real world. And it was a really, I think, kind of difficult spiritual experience for him.
Yeah.
And the one thing that he shared that at least he felt like revealed to him the truth, like that's that Neo question of like, what is the reality that I'm living? Like, which one of these experiences is real? The one that I was just in, or the one I'm in now? And he said he noticed this was the real world because in the previous world that he was just living in his coma world, he like never did the dishes. Like he never did mundane things.
That's awesome.
And it was, I think, hitting on what what Agent Smith was talking about with like the first Matrix they put together, which was that the first one was so perfect that like it didn't work. They actually had to put it back into like a real scenario that had like sufferings
that had pain and
that had
suffering
pain
to make it seem more believable.
to make it seem more believable. And even Jason Shanks' lived experience of that was the same, and that he knew that was fake because it didn't have mundane day-to-day activities.
Yeah.
There's so much spiritual truth that's happening in that moment in the film and in Jason's real lived experience that I think is worth reflecting on, that to me, I'd love to hear how he talked about it even more, but what struck me in the moment was I was thinking of just like how God works through, I think it's a Teresa of Avila quote too that I'm thinking of. It says like, while you were in the kitchen, like God is amidst the pots and the pans.
I've not heard that quote, but that's kind of cool.
I saw it at my friend Alia and Dean's place this past weekend. It was like on one of their oven mitts. And I think forgive me, Teresa, if it's not your quote or whoever said it was. I think it's Teresa of Avila. But I loved that humility of like God is in the day-to-day normal basic things. You know, like we have a saint that's about to be canonized in the church right now, Carlo Acutis. He's currently a blessed. And like he's being like advocated right now for being the man who made the ordinary extraordinary. Like he died at the age of like 14. And he's known for making this website that cataloged a lot of the like Eucharistic miracles around the world. But like he didn't do like 142 something miracles like Padre Pio or whatever. Like I'm just throwing out a random number there. He didn't write like tons and tons of tomes of theology like St. Thomas Aquinas. He just like loved people on his soccer team and like in his day-to-day life really well and did his responsibilities so well that I thought that it was just interesting that Jason was like, I knew this was reality because there was mundane stuff happening. And I think that there's something potent in the fact that God became a human and a stable as an infant and just like entered into normal life. And that is where we find God.
And that he set limits on our being so that we could I don't know, like learn to be humble in the midst of those things.
Yeah.
Right. And to choose him like sometimes despite our tiredness, but sometimes with our tiredness or with our limitation. Yeah.
I will link that video. There's a video I found online that I haven't watched the entirety of it yet, but I found him speaking about that moment, about him waking up in the coma, and I'll link that down below, and you guys can listen to his story if that's interesting to you also. I think it was powerful.
Yeah, that's sweet. Yeah, so maybe to just transition into like a couple of the things that in the film that we were like, this was a really cool film, and it was really cool to like see all like the what is the real world and like how does the real world work and like there's wool over our eyes and all that kind of cool stuff that the Matrix had for us.
But the not so good stuff.
But like there's also like some stuff in the Matrix that's like, hey, like I kind of wish you hadn't put this in there. So what do you think?
Things that come off the top of my head, is at least like the frequent uses of God's name in vain, which is probably a small consideration in the eyes of the world, but like is a big consideration in the eyes of a Christian.
Yeah.
And that like it is one of the 10 commandments. It's one of like the first things God gives as like a law is like respect my name. And one thing that I wanted to throw out on the word of like in vain, I don't think I ever really thought about what it meant to use God's name in vain until I feel like I was comparing it to how people talk about like dying in vain in like films, like, oh, John went out and made this valiant sacrifice, but now we've learned some new information that like it was a trap. He didn't have to, like he died in vain. Which I think I understood it's like for no purpose at all. And so like using God's name in vain, it's not just bad to like use his name, but it's bad to use it for no purpose at all. In the same way, like if I just called your name from across the room, but then like didn't do so that we could have communication with each other, and I used it as like an expletive, like it is not a fair way to use your name. And so how much more so like with the name of God. So for that usage in the film.
And I think that's like maybe just like say something about that maybe we don't often think about is like, why do people choose to use God's name when they're
as opposed
just
to something
like
else?
Speaking vainly? Why like there's lots of 4-letter words out there, don't get me wrong, but like God's name, like why use that? And I think because like people feel the need to like take like their ordinary words and like kind of impose in an unnatural way, as it were, some kind of authority to them by saying God's name. Like you ever hear like somebody is like, they instead of saying no, they'll say like God no. Right. And so there's a kind of way of like making themselves more interesting, making themselves more authoritative by using that name. And like, I just challenge us, especially those of us who are Christians, but all of us to like sharpen our tongues a little bit and just like what you have to say is just interesting. You don't need to you don't need to add this particular name to spice up what you say. Like, your friends will still care about you and what you think. And maybe you could like encourage them to have more sharpness and charity in their words. Yeah.
A couple other things were like, I don't know, he gives the finger to somebody and like tells somebody to go to hell. And one of the other big concerning things, though, that I thought was the conversation with, it's Mouse, right? It's Mouse is the guy's name.
Oh, you're talking about the scene with the lady in the red dress?
Yeah, lady in the red dress, which is not so much like, it's really his conversation right after that, where he's like asking Neo, like, hey, if you want like, you know, some extra time with her, like I can set that up. You know, and he has this like digital pimping of this woman.
Yeah.
Which I think is a interesting point to talk about, just some of the new things that I think are happening in our world, especially in the like advent of digital pornography. Like that is an unnatural thing for us, and like it is a damaging thing. Even like secular institutes like Fight the New Drug are really about like, how does pornography damage my mind, my heart, my relationship with others? Like, it damages people's marriages. Pornography is not it's not a good for us. It's not ultimately how our sexual nature is satisfied.
Yeah.
And I think that it was reminding me also of the fact that in our world now, people are moving towards kind of like digital or like a fake AI or like cartoon images of pornography. Even and there's maybe a rationale that I think people can express, which is like, well, I'm looking at these pornographic images, but it's not real people, and so I'm not harming a personal individual, but it does harm you, and you're a personal individual, and it's at least training ourselves to lust and degrade the image of the opposite sex or our sex. Like it's sharpening our eye towards something that it's not meant to do. It's really degrading the gift of sexuality, which was made for intimate gift of self in the confines of marriage, to bind yourself to another and to produce life. And even in a cartoon expression of pornography that's not about a real person, it's still degrading to our human nature about what sex was made for. And I'm even seeing this like kind of in the forefront of just the secular world. And that me and my fiance were watching the Game Awards the other week, and I love the Game Awards. It's super fun. I don't know if you ever watched the Game Awards.
Game Awards?
Video Game Awards, yeah. It's like the Oscars of video games.
Okay.
And it's also the night in which they like unveil all the upcoming games that are going to come out the next year.
Ooh,
so it's like
nice.
they give it an award, and then there's like 3 massive announcements for awesome video games. And even throughout, like I'm seeing just like more sexualized content even in the video game industry, which is a bummer to me. You know, there's certain trailers that just open with like, you know, they kind of grab your attention with like showing like somebody bathing
The kind
in
of
like
sex sells
kind of
kind of
the
thing.
sex sells sort of thing. But even my fiance and I were kind of picking up on, there was like 3 or 4 video games that were advertised that were all like anime video games, and a lot of them looked really similar, and it was kind of hard to tell like which one was which one. It was like, wow, this is like the 4th anime video game that we've seen. And one of them, the last one that we saw, we were like, actually that one looks pretty interesting. Like that'd be a great game for like a young girl to play. Like it was one about like, I think they like collect clothing, and the clothing that they wear like has a different like magical expression or something. I can't remember what that one was. But the other 3 that we were looking at, like even my fiance was like, there was so much like, wow, that is not the way that a woman's chest looks in real life. Like, what is happening? Like, she was noticing the sexualization of all these female characters in some of the anime world, and that's worth like expressing that anime as like an art form is wonderful, but it is being tainted by a lot of this like sexualization,
A lot of this use,
and misuse of it. And like, there's certain video games out there that's like, man, I want to play this game, but you're like forcing me to play like a hypersexualized female character that's hardly wearing like enough clothing, let alone like for this environment that she's in. It's just I think an expression that is something I'm noticing in our world, that I also notice in like Mouse is trying to like pimp off this fake woman, and that matters. And like we should be aware of the media and the things that we're choosing to consume, and voting with our dollar and our time towards the things that we think are like building up our culture.
Yeah, and that's like the kind of interesting thing with these like particular votes is like, especially as men, but also as like women, like just the way that our like nature is like we're oriented towards these goods, like especially like we're oriented towards the sexual value of other human beings, so that we can be drawn into an objective love of that person. And that's the point of it. And so when we take these particular pathways that already exist in our brain for like this like kind of noticing of like the sexual goods available in another person, and we start to use those outside of a connection to people, outside of a connection to reality, outside of a connection to commitment, like that is going to greatly hamper our ability to actually love people when it comes down to it. And we see very often like the isolation that ensues from like an overuse of pornographic media in any form. And the way that begins to destroy relationships. Yeah. And so, of course it's in the Matrix, and I think there's more to this like particular style of like 21st century art that's like, like sex is still like kind of in a liberation mode right now in the 21st century. And for Christians, so we're like, hey, like sex became in a liberation mode when Jesus reminded us that it's between one man and one woman permanently until one of them dies. And like, that's the ultimate liberation, right? Because that's like love that I can actually rely on someone, and someone can actually rely on me and like feel like secure and like be able to be built up in the midst of that security. Yeah. And so like, we just want you to love people, and we're sorry the Matrix is a bad example of this.
And even like in the film, they recognize that like Mouse is not like presenting that as like a great idea, but it's at least like an interesting thing that the film was unpacking that I thought was worth talking about. And so like if you're somebody that's like struggling with pornography, or even like pornography that is depicting more like cartoon, fake, not real things, we love you. We're not sharing this out of like judgment. I certainly don't have judgment towards anybody that's experiencing those things, but like I want you to experience like the freedom of truth and the freedom of beauty. And so like I harp on these things because like I think that there's many stories I've heard of people that are enslaved by it, and it's not leading them to freedom. I'm always intrigued by when I hear like men that are not married that are like engaged with, pornography, and then they get married, and then it's away for maybe like a few months, and then it like comes back, and because they're recognizing like,
and it hurts everybody,
and it hurts their spouse, and it's like there's something that is being like trained in their brain to like have high dopamine hits towards that, not even like their normal expression of like sexuality in marriage is like satisfying. It's like they're training their brains to be hypersexualized towards like a screen and not a person. And so they're not used to the vulnerability and the expression of self with like another individual. And then there's all these stories of people who cut pornography out of their lives, and then they're like, oh my gosh, like me being with my partner is so much more satisfying because I'm finally like rewiring my brain to fall more deeply in love with this person and not like an image of a person, a fake or real person. And so like there is greater depths of satisfaction that people are experiencing by, I think, cutting these things out.
Yeah, for sure.
Other little small things that I think was interesting to me was when they were preparing him to take, not preparing him to take the red pill to enter into the Matrix. He was like, I can't tell you what you're going to see. You only like, you have to experience it for yourself, sort of thing. And I was like, this is about to be the most traumatic thing this man's ever going to see in his life. I think we could have prepped him a little bit for what was about to come. I don't know. I just think like,
that's probably true.
There's not any like realistic scenarios I've seen in my life where it's like, no preparation is allowed. I just got to throw you in, buddy. Maybe you guys are aware of certain scenarios.
Learning to swim, maybe. But even then, you should probably just be like, hey, you're going to want to pump your arms, kid.
Yeah, give me some kind of.
And he's taking this drug from strangers, and like, that ain't great. So just like, is that not so fruitful? Maybe it's also just kind of funny. So like, maybe the takeaway is if you're like trying to like invite somebody into something deeper, invite somebody into something new, just like walk with them and be patient with them.
Yeah, but a great that was an amazing plot moment. So like, absolutely understood for the sake of plot.
It was good.
I couldn't really tell what they were doing with the whole like don't bend the spoon, but like bend yourself sort of thing. I was like, I don't even really get what's the message and the point of that. I didn't have any applicable things in that moment. I don't know if you recall visiting the Oracle.
I think that's just like a pure mind kind of thing, like mind over matter kind of thing, which is like in one sense, like your mind ought to be in control of your will. but you also, like, your mind lives in like a real reality. So I can't bend the spoon with my mind, and I don't recommend you trying it either.
I think that there's maybe a space, like, I don't know. It seems like manifestation is becoming like more and more of a thing in this world.
Yeah,
and
I've heard that from my students. In fact, like a lot of them are like, I'm manifesting this, and I'm like, oh,
interesting. Like,
I
you'd have
don't-
to give me some
I don't
really.
think we do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about it. I'm immediately skeptical, and that like you'd have to really give me some hard evidence that me just thinking things is going to have an immediate outward impact on my objective reality.
I would say kind of to the contrary, that like, yeah, thinking about something and being particularly focused on it and like believing of it like can like have an impact on reality, just because like you begin to notice things and live in a way that you weren't living before. And so like it seems as though something magical is happening. But like we also just don't want to be like, hey, I'm affecting reality just by thinking about it. I think that would be going too far.
Yeah, there is a certain sense of like, actually, when I like listen to music that reframes my mind and helps me think in a more positive way, like, yeah, my attitude and my actions are like far more positive because like I am thinking in a more positive way, and like my thoughts have an impact on how I act and how I feel about myself. But yeah, there could be a place where it's like I put myself in the place of God, which is that like just by thinking and yearning hard enough, I will grant myself all of my heart's desires, as opposed to like, I think for the Christian, it's like, yeah, we want to think positively and our mindset affects us, but like prayer is also a real thing. Relationship with God is a real thing. Certainly like asking like petitions and requests of God is a real thing. I don't know. That was kind of interesting. I'd be intrigued to look more at the manifestation aspects of our world, but it doesn't seem to click with Christianity.
Not immediately so.
And then my last point that I wanted to bring up, and then if you have any other kind of like not so fruitful things, feel free to bring them up. But there's a moment where somebody, I think it's Cypher, that says like, "You're my own personal savior, Jesus Christ." I think it's Cypher that says that part.
Yeah, I think so.
And on the one hand, it's like, okay, yeah, we got one savior, Jesus Christ. And that was like kind of a flippant way to apply Neo to like being Jesus Christ or whatever. It's like, okay, yeah, that's not great.
Maybe a use of God's name in vain in one way, but
I thought that was actually something that I wanted to reflect on, because I was just teaching redemptive suffering to my students, and there's actually kind of like a space I feel like to kind of apply this here in that. Okay. What is redemptive suffering? Redemptive suffering is the notion that if I offer up my sufferings to God in unity with Jesus' suffering and his Paschal Mystery, which is his suffering, death, and resurrection and ascension into heaven, then like by uniting my sufferings with his, I actually get to participate in the mission of like saving myself and saving others. It is Jesus that saves me. I cannot save myself. I cannot save other people. But there is some mystical notion that Jesus said, like, take up your cross and follow me. And it's not that I am the savior, but it is the notion that like I get to participate in that, and Jesus has invited me into it. So like we are called to be Christ. It is to live him out. What is it? John the Baptist who says like, or no, who is it that says,
Paul
I must decrease.
John the Baptist.
Is it John the Baptist that says, I must decrease, he must increase? So it's just the notion that like we are called to be Christ. And as Catholics, we believe that like, hey, if I'm like sick or I have a cold or I'm stressed, there's actually some reality that I can offer up my sufferings in union with Jesus, and that somehow just offering that to God can be redemptive for myself or for others.
And God's going to use that.
To
suffering. Save the world. Yeah.
In a similar way that Jesus suffered and it had a purpose for the salvation of the world, he has given all of my suffering purpose, and that all of my suffering, if united to Jesus, pours itself out with a purpose.
This is kind of like an interesting thing, because what we're, I guess, trying to say theologically is like suffering is something that is not a good, but like suffering united to Jesus actually becomes raw material in the hands of God to reshape and rebuild the world. And like that's like kind of a wild claim. But like it's definitely scriptural. Like if you look at Paul in the New Testament, he says, I make up in my own body what is lacking in the sufferings of Christ. And if Christ had just come and saved the world, like through his own suffering, and then we called it a day,
what's lacking?
Like we'd be fine. But somehow God is still using us. Okay, there's something about that. God is still using us to like help save the world. and this goes back to the dominion thing, the love thing. God wants us to participate in his mission of redeeming the world. Yeah. And so in one way, Neo is like a personal Jesus Christ, but in another way, we all are. And that's what Christian means, like little Christs.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, there's one Savior, there's one mediator between God and man. It's Jesus. I can't save, you can't save, Neo can't save, but we can participate and be Christ to others. So I thought that there was a problem with his words, but there was also like a nuanced sort of beauty that you could probably pull out of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Other thoughts you had on like things you didn't like?
Yeah, no, not really. I really like the film. I like just thinking about like the depth of reality and stuff, and so yeah, I think it's a beautifully presented film, and maybe I didn't really like the like cyberpunk style, but like I think there's maybe some problems with that like particular style, as like it's got some more artsy stuff that's a little bit on the sexual side. It's got a little bit of that, but it's like kind of fun. So I don't know.
Yeah, I do think I've never felt like there's any specific genres that are just like inherently bad. I think that there's beauty in every genre, but I do agree that sometimes in the cyberpunk things that I do experience, like the Cyberpunk 2077 video game that came out, like that would be an absolutely fascinating game for me to enjoy. But in watching like gameplay of it, there's just like too much sexual. There's just too much sexual content and kind of like things that appear there for me that are just like a little bit of a bummer. That I'm like, I want to jump into this, but I don't want to. Yeah. I don't want to kind of vibe with that. And I haven't played the whole thing. Maybe it's a minor part, but it's at least been enough on the front of it that it seemed pretty apparent. And that's not that one game. There's a lot of other games. There's the fantasy genre can do that. The sci-fi genre can do that. So it can be found in other genres. I don't think it's inherent to one genre, but for whatever reason, it's a note. And
maybe to just, I guess you brought up one thing, like there's like a pretty good amount of violence in the Matrix, and like violence, like it's like kind of a feature of a lot of films, and like I don't know if we've talked about it like at large on the podcast. But like, there's that scene when they go into the military building, that military controlled building, and then they just have all these guns and all these weapons. And stuff.
Fascinating
it's just,
scene too.
It's honestly so hilarious. But we just it's hilarious in one way, but also like, yeah, we just need to be aware of like what we're putting into our bodies as far as like, is the violence that we see and is the violence that we view appropriate for us? Because we're living in a world with violence, and that's like just a feature of reality. But we also don't want to be a people of violence, and so we don't want to be kind of like overly saturated with it. Violence should, in one sense, bother us.
Yeah. It should like probably appear violent to us.
Yeah,
that's a good point. I even remember as a kid, I don't remember what movie it was, but there's a scene on a plane, and there's like some terrible turbulence that like throws a man up into the ceiling, and then like the plane like breaks and he like falls out, and just like seeing a man die, I think it was probably like the first time I'd seen it.
Whoa. And
like I was having a really hard time. Like it was really sad, and I just started crying. I felt so bad for him, and like I think we just turned off the movie there, like whatever. I don't remember what the film was, but like it was too jarring for me. And I look back on that and I'm like, wow, my experience of like violence and death has really changed, because like I could watch this whole film and be like, whatever.
Yeah. And I think there's a piece there too about just like our technological connection, and like, I don't know if there's studies out there probably are, but like, just like maybe like at least there's a lot of publicity surrounding like violence in our own culture and in our schools, especially. I know that only in the last couple of days, there was so terribly another school shooting in Wisconsin.
I don't think I've heard of that one yet.
Yeah, I just heard about it today. Sorry, just taking a second. And so, in the midst of those things, I think that one of the greatest cultural shifts that we've had compared to the previous generation is just like this abundance of technology and this abundance of screen time. And I think that there is a way in which like maybe there might be some connections between like, I feel like I'm living on a screen all the time, so in one sense nothing matters. And I think like why a lot of people get into maybe violent things is because it feels real in comparison. And I wasn't expecting to go down this line today. So maybe to just like remind ourselves to, yeah, like we do need to make time, like even though we're a Media Mystics podcast, we need to make time to unplug from our screens,
Absolutely.
unplug from our AirPods, which should never be like, we should never have our AirPods in when we're around literally other people. We should, it should be embarrassing to us to pull our phones out of our pocket. It should be like passing gas, says Matt Brad, when we're with other people.
Yeah,
And-
that's a good point.
And like, just be grounded in reality. Like, take our socks and our shoes off and actually like stand outside. And that sounds like maybe weird to you. You're like, dude, I'm not going to stand outside. It's the middle of the winter. But at the same time, like, I think that there is something very much lacking for us in the 21st century because of our reliance on technology. Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts on that, as you can probably tell. But those
You
are
remind me of a
them.
personal story too, which I'll share in like 5 seconds. But I was also intrigued by the scene you brought up about like them going to the government building and like shooting everybody up, and it's like the pillars are exploding and everything. Were those agents or were those just people in the Matrix?
Those were people in the Matrix.
I thought it was just people in the Matrix, which I was kind of like, my heart broke a little bit, and then I was like, we're kind of just walking in and shooting up random people in a government building. I was like, these are just people that are stuck in the Matrix, right? So we're just killing random people.
Yeah, for sure.
So it wasn't even like the agents at that point.
But they had to kill all these people to get
to
Morpheus back, you know?
Yeah, that just didn't sit. I don't know. Did not sit right with me. When I saw that the first time.
Ethically a pretty bad scenario. We could
to
hash
kill a
that
whole
out.
bunch of people in order to achieve your.
Yeah, but their other option was like, oh no, the Matrix is going to escape and find Zion, which is like the headquarters of all the free human people. And if we don't get Morpheus out of there, or destroy the whole building, or pull the plug. Oh no, they could have just pulled the plug on Morpheus.
That was another question too, yeah, which was like, is it morally okay for them to kill Morpheus to save Zion?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot of ethical questions.
There's a lot of ethical questions. I don't have any easy answers on any of that. And like, my brain is tapped out at the end of this podcast that I can't get into that right now. Like, I would have to think and pray a lot about that and talk to people that are wiser than I.
You can maybe comment about that if you have an opinion. Maybe we'll have a comment.
If we got any like medical and professional or ethics, professionals out there, please throw in your comments on those situations. Yeah. But the last story that you're making me think of that I'll kind of end on here, you talked about just like getting out and unplugging. I remember when I was in kind of the COVID era, I was living on my own and was just really addicted to like VR and video games. That was like the thing I just threw myself into. And I even remember entering into like, there was a couple games I wanted to play and I was like, I'm not ready to give up video games yet. Like, I got to finish these games. But once I finish these two, like, I'll be free. And then I'm going to unplug. Like, I want to unplug, but not yet. And then I finished a VR game. I think it was Half-Life Alyx at the time. It had just come out, and I finished Half-Life Alyx. This like awesome VR game. It was like one of the first like really big, solid single-player story games that was really good in VR. And I remember like taking off my headset. It's probably like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I look outside. It's raining a little bit, and I just walked out barefoot and just felt the cold, wet concrete and just like the rain on my body, and was like, I'm free. And like it just walked down the avenue that they'd closed for foot traffic, and it was just like me standing in the middle of the road, like underneath these, like the red and yellow flashing lights at night, just like seeing colors and just
wow,
like
sounds surreal.
I really had like a surreal like connection to my body and the world again by like telling myself I'm gonna take a break from video games for a while, and it was really quite freeing. And I think that a little bit of my freedom also in that came from like I need to find balance and not like. I kind of had this notion of like, if I'm for God, I gotta be like, I don't know. The whole video game question is another conversation, but like I needed to find balance.
Yeah.
And I was not. And so I needed to take a heavy break. So you were just reminding me of that story, which I think is also expressed well in a book I was reading at the time, which is Ready Player One.
Yeah, sure.
Also a good movie based on it. I was doing the audiobook, and even the main character in that did like the same thing that I did. He like threw himself into his own apartment, built up a virtual reality thing that even in the game he could order food that would just be like delivered to his apartment, so he never had to leave. And he even comments on his own situation where he has set up this amazing virtual reality setup, suspended in this like anti-gravity-esque thing so he can run and jump and fly. And he's like, I had built for myself a very comfortable prison. That was my experience of video games. Even a book written about video games comments on the damage of video games.
Yeah.
And I think that's certainly the matrix for me can be throwing myself into the false reality of games in an unhealthy way. Games are beautiful, but they can also be enslaving.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really poignant story. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Any final thoughts for yourself?
I have no final thoughts.
Wonderful. Could we pray first for the victims of, you said, Wisconsin?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Would you mind looking it up?
Sure.
And
then
correct
just to also
detail
end in
about
prayer.
that.
Thank you for bringing it up, too. I had not heard. There was, within the last day, it looks like a shooting in Madison, Wisconsin. So to pray for them.
Yeah.
It looks like it's Abundant Life Christian School. So let's pray for them.
Yeah. Do you want to lead that?
Sure. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God, we offer up to you the trauma that has taken place at this school in Madison, Wisconsin. For anybody who has been wounded or lost their life, we pray. We pray for the families of anybody mourning, that they be comforted by Jesus Christ, that they be comforted by the saints, such as the Blessed Virgin Mary, who watched her son suffer and die, and that our trauma and suffering might be threaded with a thread of hope, a hope in the resurrection, that suffering and death does not have the final say, but that all things will be brought to light, and that we can rise again in the resurrection that we will follow Christ in. We also pray for the assailant. I don't know in this situation what has happened to that individual, if they're alive or if they have passed, but whatever the situation may be, we pray for conversion of heart. We pray that they might see the truth and come to truly know God, that they might receive justice in the way that God wishes to give it, and also his mercy, that we might receive God's mercy for our own sins. May mercy and justice pour out into your world, God. God, we also transition to a period of gratitude. Gratitude for our lives, gratitude for the gifts you've given, gratitude for the people that we have with us, gratitude for the art and the films that you provide for us, and the filmmakers and cinematographers and editors, everybody who's worked on these works of art that we so dearly enjoy, that reveal yourself to us. Thank you. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. Peace. God bless.
God bless you. Bye.
For every work of art we talk about in this podcast, we also have prayerful guided meditations available based on that work of art in the Mystic Moments playlist. We invite you to join us for prayer. Also, a like, subscribe, a positive review, and especially supporting us on Patreon helps us dedicate more time to this ministry. Please send this episode to anyone you think might appreciate it. God bless.